They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are mourn, just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight on Rogueways, we are in for a treat as we get to interact with a real-life wizard and visionary who has done so much for the world by helping people release toxic patterns in their lives, free their inner self-identity, their soul patterns and pathways, and even learn how to become more powerful wizards and visionaries themselves. He has written 2 books entitled Crossing the Bridge to the Future and Cosmic Weather Report, and is about to drop his newest book, The Ruby Heart of the Dragon, on us, coming up later this year. Such a wizard is sure to uplift our hearts and souls, so let's welcome Mark Borax, the soul astrologer. Mark, how are you this beautiful evening?
I'm doing fine. It's a beautiful spring evening in Vermont.
It's excellent. I know I can hear the crickets in the background, and it's making me feel very happy. So thank you for sharing that with all of us as well.
No extra charge.
Yes. And before we jump in and get started, I do want to tell all the Rogue Warriors listening out there that live or on the podcast or watching this later anywhere they see it, to please go and subscribe and support Rogueways on Rockfin. That's ROKFIN, where censorship doesn't exist to suppress us. YouTube has been after me, and we don't want to lose touch with one another. And plus, it's just an amazing way to support me and all the other shows you love. You get all of us for one subscription price, and so that's really cool. And also you can go to rogueways.org for tarot readings, spiritual support, orgone, and other crystalline necklaces and all kinds of cool stuff. So go check it out. And thank you for being here and for being you. You guys all make the dream real, and I love each and every one of you. So Mark, back to you. The pointless question of the episode that I was going to ask you is, what is a neat dream that you've had recently?
You mean a literal dream, or you mean like a vision?
I guess either, wherever you want to take it.
Let's see. What is a neat dream I have? A neat dream I've had recently is that the intense chaos and wrongness that's being broadcast all over the planet serves to yank people out of numbness and apathy and into incarnating the deeper love that they're actually made of.
I love that. It's such it's true. A, I'm totally with you. And B, it's a nice way for people to reframe things too, because otherwise you get stuck in terror, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We need some deep fertilizer from the soul, because we're not getting it from our culture. Our culture's in its death throes, but it's prolonged, protracted, and very painful. But that's not the only thing that's happening. And so if you dig down deeper into the story of the soul, then you can find, hallelujah, this is the death of everything that never even worked right in the first place.
Yeah, we want that. That's true. Yeah, it's a really remarkable opportunity when you think about it. But in the meantime, you know, it feels to people like everything's falling apart and like they have nowhere, you know, firm to stand, or like we can't be sure of anything in the future. And I don't know what you want to maybe say about that, but I just always think, well, you never really did. Like, it was always just an illusion anyway, if you felt like you could be sure of the future.
That's right. We're witnessing the collapse of false security.
Yeah.
And that had to occur. We predicted that in the 1960s because that was when it first started to collapse. You know, big time in the 1960s, the structures were revealed as shaky for the first time. And I was part of the youth rebellion movement of that time. And I got the lesson, which was there's got to be something better for the reason why people are here at all than to support the war machine and throw their lives away on meaningless bullshit jobs and marriages. So we knew it was falling apart. But the 60s revolution was so scary to conservative forces that they yanked back hard with a vengeance. So that the 70s and 80s, we went from John Lennon to Ronald Reagan and George Bush. And so the 70s and 80s ended up yanking back towards like the pre-1960s, towards the 50s, because they were so scared that love was going to take over everything and stop the war. But now it's collapsing again. So this isn't unexpected, and it has to occur because there's no going back. There's nothing to go back to. We can only go forward, and it's scary. And there's a lot of paranoia like there was in the 60s, and there's a lot of breakdown. And, that's like a snake sloughing off its dead skin. It's got to go.
Yeah. It's a beautiful way to look at it. How old were you in the 60s when you were part of all of that? Was that sort of the beginning of your awakening personally, or?
It was. It was at least the beginning of my cultural, political awakening. It wasn't, maybe in some subtle way, it was the beginning of my spiritual, it was the beginning of my mystical spiritual awakening, because I dropped acid in 1970, and I saw the band Traffic play their John Barleycorn Must Die album at the Capitol Theater in Portchester, New York. And that sent me out of Stratford, Connecticut, WASP upbringing into cosmos shamanism, and I just never came back.
That's awesome.
It just shot me out, and I just kept going. So I was just old enough to get the 60s, because I turned 13 in the summer of 1967, and I was a very precocious 13-year-old, getting everything I could read, that I could get my hands on about what was going on in the West Coast and in Europe, and in places a lot hipper than Stratford, Connecticut. And then I hitchhiked to San Francisco when I was 16 in the summer after my junior year in high school, and I got in on the tail end of the 60s, because right there in 70 and 71, the 60s were still there. They hadn't quite left yet, and I kind of just barely drank it in, and so I still have it now, and I'm pretty much in my prime. Unlike most people who got the 60s, they're usually a little older than me.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. You got to keep a little bit extra youth and carry that energy forward.
That's right.
That's
cool. Like a spiritual bank account.
Yeah. I know acid and psychedelics can do that for so many people. And did that continue to be part of your process of awakening, or was it kind of like something you used but then moved on for? Or?
It did continue to be part of my awakening throughout my whole life. I still haven't stopped, but I didn't ever go all the way in. I was never a habitual pot user. I wasn't one of these guys who like smokes 40 hits of pot 3 times a day. And
yeah.
It's like I'd smoke, I get stoned for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I might stop for 6 months, and then I might smoke one day and then not for 3 weeks. I've just been all over the place. With acid, I was way more cautious. I had some very strong acid trips in the early 70s, because acid then was about real. 10 times stronger than it is now.
And it was none of that fake. Sometimes it's fake and like diluted, and yeah, I totally.
Well, they did that then too. But the point is that the dosage was tenfold now. So like a 13-year-old kid dropping acid today would have to do 10 hits to equal what I did. And I'm not advocating that,
no.
Believe me.
Yeah.
I mean, I tripped for 3 days and nights and thought I was never going to be straight again. Full vivid hallucinations and colors from seeing Traffic. And then years later, I spoke to Stevie Winwood, and he told me how they made their songs, which was they all tripped for like 10 days and nights and kept the reel-to-reel recorders rolling while they jammed.
That's awesome.
And then they'd like come down and spend a week straight listening to everything they played and stopping at certain places and saying, that's a song. Wow. And they'd like pull out 5 minutes and write lyrics for it. And I thought, no wonder you guys sent me on my first acid trip,
Yeah.
And when I ran into him about 10 years ago in Boston, I got to ask him about it. I got to meet him,
wow.
Spend a couple hours with him. And I said, Stevie, I heard that you guys used to make music by just tripping your brains out straight way back when outside England in the 60s. And he looked at me and he said, that's still how we do it.
That's still how we do it.
Yeah. So I thought, yeah, Stevie Winwood. Yeah.
It makes so much sense. You like get on that wavelength or that, you know, vibration or whatever it is, and then you can like transmit that to other people more easily, especially through something like music or art or whatever it is you might be able to share with people from like a creative place. And so, of course, that would work. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, drugs have been very, very good to me. I never got on the bad side of drugs, and I never abused them either. And but what I did get from my early acid trip years, which I probably took acid about 3 or 4 times in a 2-year period, and then I waited 10 or 15 years before I did it again. But in those early ones, one acid trip would plunge me into the deepest core of my soul and reveal to me the x-ray of my relationships with my family and the stories under the stories, and in such a way that I think it would take about 20 years of normal weekly psychotherapy to do what one acid trip used to do for me. And I'm not exaggerating or trying to be facetious. I actually believe that. And I learned this NLP thing from just tripping out. I didn't know anything about NLP, but I just knew if I could phrase a sentence over and over and over and just evolve it a little each time, it would be like an emotional ice pick. It would just thaw something from some deep part of my soul. And so then I would come out the other side exhausted and reborn. And it was like a death and a resurrection.
Wow. I totally understand that conceptually, having done acid, where you can go in and have this trip and you understand these things that are literally ineffable. Like you cannot communicate them to anyone when you come back, but they're in you now and you have that now inside of you, right? But you just can't necessarily like share it in any way. And maybe that is the best way, like you said, like crafting this perfect series of sounds, you know, to represent something, both like in the meaning of the word, but maybe even in the actual like wavelength of the sounds that are like as they're strung together, if that even makes sense.
It does make perfect sense.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because I did a lot of acid, so I can totally
you know what I mean.
it.
Yeah,
I do. Yeah, you're talking about the psychic subliminal sublanguage that people are really like animals telepathically exchanging with each other, though their conscious minds are almost never tracking with it, you know, unless they're like Neil Cassidy or on an ayahuasca journey or something. And then you can track with that. That's what I do when I write my books and give my soul level astrology readings and teach my classes and do my interviews. I mean, I'm doing it now. There's like the concepts. You and I just met like, 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And I've never talked with you before. I've never even seen a picture of you, but we're like talking in the way like normal human beings tend to relate to each other, like identifying with our bodies and our egos in time and space. But underneath that, there's this other talk, which is like, yo, fellow traveler, right? We've come a long way and we're living in such fucked up times, but there's something really beautiful that's trying to happen. And I can hear you saying that to me, yes. Like on a sub language, right? Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because I end every show by saying fellow travelers of the path. It's a beautiful thing. And you just called me a fellow traveler.
Yeah, well, there we go.
Yes.
Right.
So it's absolutely happening that way. Yeah, I think sometimes that people maybe don't realize, because this tends to happen to me a bit on this show, is that because I don't even remember how I found you or why I found you. And I'm not thinking too hard about that, but I bet there's a listener out there right now going, I told you to find him. So thank you, whoever you are.
Yeah.
But, I think people don't realize that we've never talked before the show because of things like that.
That's why I told him. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is like full candid disclosure tonight here.
Yes. So how did you get drawn from that stage into like learning astrology or learning that you have these skills or wanting to offer that to people?
It was in stages that all had turned out later to have synchronicities and common themes to them. And I guess the first real stage was when I was 29, when I turned 29 in October. When I was about to turn 29, when I was 29 and I was going to turn 30, right? It was October of 1984 in Burlington, Vermont, in my Saturn return, which happens at 29 years old, but I didn't know anything about that because I didn't know much about astrology. My girlfriend at the time gave me an astrology book for my birthday and said, I think you're going to like this. And yeah, like, little did she know, or maybe she did. And so it was Alan Oken's Complete Astrology, As Above, So Below. And before she gave me that book, I hadn't thought much about astrology ever, other than I grew up in the 60s, and there was the musical Hair with the Age of Aquarius, and astrology was in the air in the 60s and 70s, but I never really, I wouldn't have said I believed in it, but nor did I disbelieve in it. I just was open to it. Then I read this book and I was riveted. And I spent 3 years studying that book and doing his exercises, learning how to interpret my own birth chart. And I wanted to follow the ancient Greeks' dictum written above the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi, which is know thyself. And I thought, let me just study my own chart. And I ended up doing that for 3 years, not studying anyone else's chart except my own. I took the Greeks seriously. I just went deeper and deeper in, and I'm reading all this stuff about how astrology relates to religion, and how Isaac Newton, the father of modern science, reputedly said to Edmund Halley, the discoverer of Halley's Comet, Edmund Halley said to Isaac Newton, why do you waste your time with the study of astrology, of all things, as a scientist? And supposedly Isaac Newton's retort was, sir, I have studied the matter. You have not. And I thought, whoa, yeah. And that stuff was like riveting me because I'm a skeptic. I grew up in New York City in the 50s, and I had a lot of street smarts by the time I was 10 years old, and so I didn't want to just go rushing off believing in something for a crutch to have something to believe in, because I didn't need a crutch. But what I did get from it was this multidimensional lens, this kaleidoscoping lens, which was a historical creation, because astrology came from way back in the Paleolithic era, and it came through ancient India, and it came through Egypt and Babylon and Chaldea, and it came through medieval France, and it came through the 19th century, and then through the 1960s it got completely revamped in this country and elsewhere. And so by the time I got it, it was this repository. Like at each stop along the way, the zodiac had dropped something off and picked something else up, and it's doing it now. And that's what I'm doing with my current book. I'm completely tearing down the common, trite, cliched understandings of the 12 signs of the zodiac, and I'm building them back up from scratch, from the soul. And I've been working on it for 2.5 years, 7 days a week, but really it's been brewing and bubbling for 40 years in me, because that was the first stage in this synchronicity that I told you about. When Suzanne gave me that book for my Saturn return birthday, I spent 3 years fascinated in it. I'm going to pause just to see. There's more to this story, but I don't want to interfere with any of your programming, so I'm just going to check in with you.
Oh, no, I love this story. I totally want you to keep going.
Okay.
After you take a drink.
Okay, thank you. So that was when I was in Burlington, Vermont, age 29. I got his book and studied for 3 years. At the end of those 3 years, we had moved, Suzanne and I, to Berkeley, California, where we met this woman, Susan, who became a really close friend of ours. And she was going to the JFK Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, studying to be a therapist. And one night she came breathlessly running over to me saying, I just had the most amazing fucking reading in my life. She grabbed me by the hand. She said, you have to come over to my house now and sit on the couch, and I need to listen to it with you all over again from the beginning. And said, all right, let's go. So I did. I went to her home. We sat on her couch, and she plugged in the cassette tape. And it was a reading by this guy named William Lonsdale, who she showed me his business card. And all it said was William Lonsdale, his phone number, and move your mountains. And we sat there, and she turns on this tape, and this guy starts talking to her. And within about like 6 or 7 minutes, we're like jumping up to pause the tape and say, did you hear what he said? Did he say what I think he said? Wait, go back again. I want to check some. And like we took this reading that had taken her 90 minutes to go through. It took us like 5 hours because we kept stopping it and saying, oh my God, this guy is a wizard. He's like, he's like Eric Clapton is like one of the world's greatest guitarists, and Jeff Beck is one of the world's greatest guitarists, and John McLaughlin. But then there's Jimi Hendrix. He's from another fucking planet. Yeah. He's from another dimension. That's what this guy was. Like, there's good astrologers and psychics and numerologists, and there's geniuses, Rudolf Steiner in the past. And now here was William Lonsdale, and he was the Jimi Hendrix of astrologers. It was like he was from a whole other fucking planet. And this guy, I got a reading from him, which I describe in one whole chapter in my first book, 2012, Crossing the Bridge to the Future, which I'm going to retitle to Sex, Love, and Astrology, because it's really about that more than 2012. Awesome. And this guy blew my fucking mind. The things he said to me, I dramatize it in the whole chapter of the book. It's a really good scene. And at the end of this thing, I shake his hand, I say goodbye, and I walk over to this little bridge. It was Ross, California, in Marin County, behind a chiropractor's office where I'd had the reading. And I'm standing on this little arched bridge looking down at the dragonflies, and I see like my whole body is soaked in tears. And I had no idea. And I thought to myself, what this guy just did for me, I have to learn to do for everyone else. And I said, he's got to be my teacher, and then began the classic Sorcerer's Apprentice. I'm saying, teach. He's saying, no. And like he said, me and my wife just stopped teaching for years. I'm taking a break. And so I let go of it for 2 or 3 years. And then it turns out that through a set of interesting changes, a new girlfriend I moved with her down to the Santa Cruz Mountains in Northern California, to the Redwoods. I ended up living less than a mile from his house where he lived with his wife, and they were just starting up a whole series of classes again.
Wow.
And that's all in the book too. But when I before the classes started, I got to go spend a night at their house, and it turned out we both he's 5 years older. We both started life in Queens, New York, and then we moved to Northern Vermont, and then we moved to Willamette Valley, Oregon, and then we moved to Bay Area, California, and then we moved to the Santa Cruz Mountains, in that order. Wow. But he was always a few years ahead of me, just like he was a few years older than me.
Wow.
And when that stuff starts happening, it's just like, there's like, you don't even bother figuring the odds or questioning it shit. I knew I had to be there. And then I got in and I learned this whole other way to use astrology that he recovered from a dream of Atlantis after studying with the two top astrologers of the 1960s, Dane Rudyard and Mark Edmund Jones. Wow. So that's the whole story in my first book. But now I'm revamping the Zodiac, and I'm taking all that stuff and applying it in a whole new way to just tear down the ideas and get to the soul and build each sign back up again. And I'm almost through. The book will be due out a year from now. Oh yeah, and I want your listeners, sign up for my free Cosmic Weather Report newsletter at markborax.com. And if you sign up for my free newsletter within the next 24 hours, I will put you on my list to give you an advance e-chapter of your sun sign when my book is close to being ready for publication.
Awesome. I'm writing it all in the chat just in case.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Mark Borax, MarkBorax, markborax.com. Just sign up for my newsletter, the Cosmic Weather Report, and you'll find out about all my travels, and you'll be the first to know when the book's getting ready, and you can cash in on your e-chapter. And I'll ask you if you'd like to write an endorsement for me after you read it.
Yeah, that's always really handy too. That's awesome. Well, when you're describing this story of following him across the country basically without knowing it, I just feel like those are those things, like you said, you don't really try to figure out the odds, but you also realize the universe is like, hey, like, do this. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm trying, like, I'll do it. And like
That's right.
And then I wonder too how you feel, because I used to think that I had a choice about things, and then I had one of my own mystical, like synchronicity wild times, and I was basically told, like, oh, you don't have a choice. No, like you're just going to do this stuff. I'm like, oh, okay. So what do you think about that? Do we have free will, or is it all sort of our soul has predestined it and we're just sort of living it out? Or what do you
Yes.
think? Yeah, both.
I think yes. Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I think that we have a whole lot less choice than we think we do. And with the big things in our life, we have almost none at all. But I think with the smaller and like medium things in our life, I think we have some improvisational wriggle room. But I think that the design, you see, our soul is here on a reincarnational arc. Once upon a time, the person that is now you was part of a greater cloud of soul sparks in spirit. And you sparked off the cloud and you launched your first human incarnation. Your soul entered a body and that body lived and died. And then your soul went back to spirit for a while until it was ready to come back in. And that was your second human incarnation. And so by the time you got here into this life, you have quite a long buildup in your own particular way of themes and lessons that your soul was specifically trying to learn on its way toward incarnating its fuller nature, its cosmic force, its love, its presence. And we keep coming back again, not the way the Hindus and the Buddhists think. It's the point of reincarnation is not to get so perfect that you don't have to come back again. That's like saying we keep coming back and back and back in order to get out of here. And it just doesn't make any sense.
True.
I think we keep coming back and back and back in order to get into here with our fuller presence, which makes being here not some sort of prison sentence. It's not some sort of punishment because you, like your soul was trying to get to nirvana and you missed and you hit New Jersey instead or something. It's like, no, when you show up with your fuller love nature, with your soul, with your presence, with the art of yourself, then everything that's happening here becomes ensouled because you did. When you fully arrive, when you, regardless of what's happening out there, pandemic, corona, nuclear destruction, Cuban Missile Crisis, whatever's going on in the physical plane, the only power that you have to ever do anything about any of it is the power of love, is the power of your presence, the fuller arrival of what it is to be here while even being all these other planes that you're multidimensionally inhabiting. So you don't have to go there. You don't have to escape here to go there. You don't have to get out of incarnational rigors. You just have to get in a very free way where just being alive is this treasure and blessing, even at this crazy time, especially at this crazy time, because we're at the crossroads of the human race. What we do in the next 50 years is going to determine if there is any more human race. It's all happening now. And whatever it is, you got to bring love into it. Whatever it is, you got to bring soul into it. And so any power that you have to really affect things, especially for the better, for the cause of evolution, has to do with the fuller arrival of your love. And when you realize this and be grateful for this blessing and this miracle to be alive, it's just this extraordinary event that the universe formed itself in the shape of you. I mean, how unlikely is that? Yeah. What an amazing fucking thing. What a trip,
That's what I spent like my whole like childhood or like a, teenage life, I guess, being like, but seriously, you guys, like, what are we doing here? Like, what is this place? Why are we here? Why does no one care? Why is no one asking? Why is no one telling me and like trying to figure this out? Nothing else matters. I don't care about math and like science. I do, but you know what I mean? Like, really, I just want to figure out like, what is this? And then, everyone was like, that's okay, right. Crazy. Shut up. No.
Yeah, no, I think you had it backwards. It's mostly everyone else who was crazy. You were becoming sane.
Right.
You were dropping out. I had that moment in Stratford, Connecticut when I was 9. I had this secret passageway because we had this house built before the Civil War, and it had all these extra rooms and dusty attics and one passage that
if you open the panel on one side, you get to a whole other part of the house.
Wow.
It was up in the attic. And I was the only one who used that. And I would go in there with my cat and my flashlight and my comic books. And I'd spend hours just in the secret passageway. And one day I remember being in the secret passageway. So I was 9. So that would have been like 1963, like maybe around the time Kennedy got shot. I was in this passageway and I had this realization. And the realization came in the form of they've forgotten. All the adults have forgotten. They're not who they are. They're pretending to be these other things that have nothing to do with what's real, because what's real is hitting me now for the first time. And I didn't have a word for it, like it was magic or it was ego or spirit. I didn't know any of that. I just knew on a gut level, especially with 4 of my planets in Scorpio and 2 in Capricorn, like on a gut level, I got it, that something must occur between the age of magic that I'm experiencing as this 9-year-old kid who's just blossoming and opening and writing. I knew I was going to be an author, and I was writing like crazy, poetry and everything. Something must occur between my age and their age to take them out of that true magic, because they're not in it anymore. And I thought, whatever that thing is, or maybe it's a combination of things, I made a vow. This is not going to happen to me. No matter how old I get, I will never forget. They've forgotten. My mother is not who she is. Neither is my father or most of my friends' parents and teachers. Once in a while, there's an adult who still didn't forget. Once in a while, there's one of those wacky, like the cat lady in the town who's just feeding 500 cats, you know. And so, but besides those few adults, the rest have forgotten. And I knew this at age 9, and it was intense, because that meant, who could I trust to help me grow up? Nobody. And it was really chilling. It was like, I got to grow myself up. There's nobody around me here. But I went from that at 9 to 4 years later at 13, the hippie revolution in the Summer of Love, 1967. And it was Jefferson Airplane and Donovan and Cat Stevens and the Dead. It was like, they lifted me up. You know, traffic lifted me up. Hitchhiking from Connecticut to California lifted me up. And so the astrology synchronicities continue after I ended up meeting William Lonsdale, and I became his apprentice, and I spent 7 years studying with him. And that's this memoir, the story of my first book. So that's how I went from whatever we were first talking about, where you said, how did I go from that
to here?
Yeah, exactly. That kind of encapsulates. There's a whole lot more.
I think a lot of people listening can relate to that moment you had where you realized that all of the adults had forgotten, you know, and that it's kind of scary in a way, like you said, because you're like, realize you're alone, you don't have anyone who can help you grow up. But it's also scary, I think, because you maybe feel like, how will I not fall into that? If it's got everybody, like, how do you not do that? And so and even if people didn't have that when they were 9, you know, maybe they had something similar more recently, but finding your sort of tribe or your vibe or whatever too is like this miraculous, like, oh my God, I'm not alone, right? And I think a lot of people who are drawn to this show, or probably who are drawn to you in your life, you find too, are just like, thank God this exists. Like, I thought I was so alone and I felt so disconnected, and here are all these other people who also remember, you know, for lack of a better, I like that description. We remember. We're not crazy.
Absolutely.
We're not like, there's nothing else going on. We just remember.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. You're noting a lot of how I work with people and what people get from me and what I get from them. I've devoted my life in various ways. I'm a musician, songwriter, performing artist, book author, astrologer, and who the hell knows what else, all kinds of things. And in all of the things, though, the common denominator is that I help people find their way back out of the lost world into the soul.
That's so beautiful. And I wonder too how you feel, because I don't know if any of my work that I do is similar, but it feels similar as you're describing it. And I think a lot of people are expecting something else than what happens. Because I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize that, like, the true kind of work, so to speak, of being here, and the way that you like save the world is really by saving yourself. And like, you have to go deep in there. And sometimes it's things you didn't like expect. Like, you thought you were going to be told that you were like an African princess 4 lifetimes ago, and instead you're told that you need to like stop treating people badly or whatever, like, or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And by the way, they're not mutually exclusive,
True.
those two things.
That's true.
They're kind of consequential. If you were an African princess in another life, you better start treating people better in this life.
That's a good point.
But yeah, there's a lot of bullshit in the New Age. And I came of age, I opened my astrology practice in the San Francisco Bay Area at the height of the New Age in 1987. And there was a lot of bullshit. Psychic readers on every street corner, and you go to a psychic reader and everybody was either Joan of Arc or William Shakespeare in a past life. It's like, how many fucking people could be Joan? There's 2 people alive who were Joan of Arc and William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Nobody's Joe the plumber. Okay, sit down. I got news for you. Give me $500. I'm going to tell you about your past life. You were Joe the plumber. Okay, next.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be Joe the plumber. But despite the bullshit of the New Age, which I used to satirize in Santa Cruz, and there was also something very real happening, especially in Santa Cruz, this melting pot of mystical and spiritual forces for many, many years, especially the 10 years that I lived there. And when the search for enlightenment follows Rudolf Steiner's dictum. Steiner said, if you really wish to become enlightened, if you wish to gain psychic mastery, okay, but just remember that for every step you take in that direction, you must take 3 steps toward becoming a better human being.
Yes.
And that became my mantra. I took that to heart. And that and my teacher's advice the day I met him and he gave me that reading, he said, if you're going to be an astrologer, Mark, you'll go to the top because you're not going to ever settle for less. But you got to remember one thing. And I said, what? He said, the vast majority of people who do this work, astrology and psychic readings and numerology, are phonies. They're not doing the real version of it. Most of them don't know they're phonies and don't think they're conning people. Some of them do. Most of them don't think they're phonies, but they are. He said, if you want to not be a phony, you have to remember one thing. And I said, what? Don't ever think you know what Gemini is. Be willing to find out all over again what Gemini is with each new Gemini who comes in for a reading, or Virgo or Sag or any of the signs. And that became my mantra, along with Steiner's advice, take 3 steps toward becoming just a better human being. For every step, I really want to fly up that transcendental ladder and just be the coolest astrologer who ever lived,
That is such good. The pair of those, the Gemini twinning of those pieces of advice is amazing. Like, what a powerful set of tools to use, and I really personally feel like I have experienced both of those too, where I do tarot readings and sometimes a card will come up and I read it one way and then the next time it comes up it's like a totally different meaning, and I know there's people who are like, why is she saying it means that? And I'm like, this is what it means for you in this spot today, right now, here. Like, that's just true. I don't know what else to say.
That's right.
That flexibility I think is probably applicable to like anything really worthwhile that you're going to do, right? You can't be completely stuck to like this unmoving definition or idea in your head, because that's not what life is. Life is always moving.
That's right. Especially if you're a Sagittarian like you, or if you have Sag moon and rising like me. You can't do it any other way.
No.
I couldn't give the same reading twice if I tried. I couldn't look at the birth. For me, I do star jazz. For me, the birth chart is like a standard music chart. Like like Stardust or something. And even though the music exists and the notes are written on sheets, that song has to be played in entirely different fashion every time you play it. You know, Stardust has been played thousands of times. Jazz is that in this moment, I'm taking the astrology chart and I'm playing it in a way that's infused with this living moment and the psychic dialogue between you and I, and the color of the clouds that day, and who knows what else. And so when you open to pulling out of the chart the deep stories of the soul, then the astrology gives way. It's not boxing people off. It's not typecasting. And that was the great discovery of Jones and Rudyard in the 1960s. My teachers' teachers. The discovery, especially of Mark Evan Jones, was that until Jones, who came along in the 1920s, astrology charts were looked at as the writing of what is. And Jones said, no, it's the writing of what can be. He opened up the chart to potential rather than medieval fate of astrologers who worked for the king when he needed good auguries for battle, right? And the astrologer was in the service of the king. And so Jones and Rudyard liberated the chart to be an indicator of what could be if you really bring your fuller soul force into the mix, right? Which is not the way that most people do it. Most people hang back instead of being like fully alive and fully present. So when you look at the chart that way through jazz, then the system of astrology loses its didacticism. It loses its imprisoning ability. It's a freeing device. It's just a channel. Just like the chart of that jazz tune that's been played 10,000 times. You got to open the channel. You got, that's like the Grateful Dead. They'd rather fall flat 10 nights in a row doing a concert and trying something new, and one night just transcending than like these rock bands that sign contracts to have to play the lead guitar piece, the note for note, the exact same way on the album. I spoke to a guitarist of April Wine, a famous Canadian band, and he said, Mark, touring is a nightmare with April Wine because I have to play the same exact notes in the same way every night. I couldn't be that kind of astrologer, right? And you couldn't be that kind of human being. I mean, you're just, it's just you're way too Sagittarian for that. I've only known you for an hour and I already know that.
That's like when people are like, what's your show about? I'm like, everything. And they're like, oh, well, what do you do for a living? I'm like, everything. Like, I don't have really descriptions for things, and that makes it hard for people to know what I'm doing, but it's the best I can do. But it's like that relationship that you then have with it. I remember saying to someone like, well, I could never really do readings for other people because I can't memorize what all the cards mean because I don't have that type of memory. And, so that's that. And then I just slowly started to understand like, oh, I don't have to memorize it because I understand the energy of the card and I understand how it relates to this person in this moment. I don't need memorization. I don't need to like put everything in a little box. And that is really when it took off and exploded. But do you find that when people come to you to get readings or to have your assistance in freeing themselves and unlocking these things and unthawing these mountains inside of themselves, that that sometimes they don't actually want that and they don't end up taking any of it with them when they go or whatever?
I used to occasionally find that in the earlier years of my practice, let's say from 1987 to 1992 in the Bay Area. I used to occasionally run into that, but it wasn't that common for me. It was maybe like one out of every 12 or 15 clients maybe was like that. But a couple of them were like really like that, very intense karmic lessons, because those were the lessons that I, as a young man, needed to draw to myself. I had issues of power and authority. And so I'm going to bring in clients that are once in a while going to challenge my power and authority, right?
Yeah.
and usually unconsciously, which is a lot harder to deal with than consciously, because then if you even address it, you're the bad guy.
True.
Right. So this is a California ego tripping new age society I'm learning to be a young astrologer in, right?
True.
So age 33, 34, 35. But then after those first few years, less frequently, and then now I've been doing astrology 34 years as a living, and when my first book came out and became a bestseller, 2012, The Bridge to the Future, which came out in 2008, all of a sudden, I noticed a huge sea change in the way my clients, especially first-time clients, began to approach me. It was like half of the battle had already been won because they read my book, which was one of the stories of my life and my apprenticeship, and they could relate. And so they came in with more reverence and respect. And I could see that they not only were paying me a good amount of money for their reading, but they were really handing me the money as if it was a sacred offering. It was like prasad, like on an altar. And they really saw, like, I earned their trust without even having to start. And so in that state, which has been since 2008, there's been maybe one or two really intense problem clients like that I had it out with. But as I worked out a lot of my own issues and convolutions and leftover issues of early childhood and past life karma, I think just my own vibration got clearer, and I had less and less need to be karmically challenged because I'd already gone through it so much, with my psychedelics and with just my years of self-work, and also through love and sex, which was like my greatest teacher, was sex and love. Just, I felt I would fall in love so deeply, so super intensely. It was like two galaxies coming together, and then apart, it would be just as intense. I went through many deaths and resurrections through sexual love for many years.
And that's very Scorpio, right? And you're very
Scorpio.
That's
my Scorpio, 4 planets in Scorpio, but Sag and Libra too. And my whole chart is ultra relational. But I'm also a hermit here in Vermont, and you wouldn't believe how much time I spend at home and on my property. It's interesting. I have both. I'm like an extroverted hermit or something.
I think I'm very similar. I think people think I'm an extrovert, but I'm like, no, I'm pretty introverted actually. And I never really wanted to be having a show actually, but I was called to do this, and here I am doing it, and I love it. I am in no way complaining, but I have to make myself do it. It's not what I seek. It's not what I really want. But so I get that, and having that time alone is desperately necessary for me. I need alone time, and I need to be in nature, and I need to have that. And so I don't know, that space I think also allows for some of that self-work that you're talking about, where you get to reflect and sort of dive in and deal with those inner battles that you have. And I don't know, I'm always trying to push that on people, this is the real work, this is what you do, this is how you save all of yourself, it's how you save the world, it's how you transform everything, it's how people want to have deeper experiences or transcendental experiences or these types of things. I'm well, that's how you do it. Right? I think that's how you do it is that you heal yourself. You go inside.
Yeah, that's necessary. And it's not the only way.
That's a good point.
Some people get it by going out. I've noticed in my travels a kind of a person who somehow, when they're doing business and relationship and other things like that, has almost like an inner glow. It's like they're in it, but they're not really of it. And there's a grace in that, because it's like the Bodhisattva rather than the Buddha. Both of them seek enlightenment, and both of them get there, and the Buddha remains in enlightenment, but the Bodhisattva goes back to Chicago. And you know, there's this thing where you do have to go in. You do have, whether you do it out or in, like whether out there in the world, the events that happen cause you, because you have a conscience, to look inward. And also there's this way of going deeper into yourself while you're going to connect with others, like in contact improv. It's like you're leaning on them, but you're also rolling around them, right? And they're rolling around you and they're leaning on you. So I think that it's not like this either or. It's not like either you just lose yourself in society or you claim yourself when you separate. It's rather just that until you find out who you are, you're easily pushed over by the false tides of our time. And you're pissing away another incarnation. You're wasting your love. You're selfishly holding on to your creative life force instead of giving it to the rest of us. But there needs to be a new definition of service, so that if you want to change the world, and if you do care about so many things that are happening that shouldn't be, you should find a way to serve that also serves your truth, which redoes the ancient Judaic Christian cultural mindset about guilt and martyrdom. So that, sure, the only way you're going to be of use to some kids starving in Africa is if you unstarve yourself and feed yourself and have more extra love, more extra soul. If you want to go to Africa or send money to that child, go ahead. And it's just that whatever you do, whether you're choosing to go toward or away from or serve or retreat, it just needs to be a movement toward self, rather than away from self. Like Rainer Maria Rilke, the Austrian poet, said, "Who has so twisted us around that whichever way we go away from?" And he was a Sag too. And it's just this thing where whichever way you go, it's got to be towards soul and love and ownership and arrival and presence, you know, because the strange, wacky distortions of our time only occur through the multitudes because there's nobody home inside. People are vacant, and so these hitchhiking parasitic entities move in because they're not at home inside their soul, their body, their sex, their love, their truth. This is what the thing in the 60s was all about. Get out of your box. All you need is love. And when you take everything wrong and bring to it a force of something so right, just that you are, just like you is, that you exist, just even that rightness, just even that you could cry or tremble or weep, even the realness of that, you inject deep realness into the mirage, and the unrealness of our time just starts to waver and loosen up a little bit.
Yes, what a great description of that process. I really love that. I was thinking of something to ask you or say, and then it totally left me because I got lost in that moment. I really, you know, I hope people trust that feeling more because I think, you know, it's like we have so many things going on in our mind that are that box. And we think that it's really real and really important. And like, well, I have to pay this bill and I have to go to bed. I'm not saying those things don't exist. I'm just saying like that call of your soul and that love, that passion that you have, and that thing that is really truly you that you should move towards more and more. It might cut away some of that stuff. And that's like really difficult for people to let go of that, you know, and to say like, but no, that's me. Like I'm this person who, you know, like I was a teacher and I finally had to leave that, and it was the best thing I ever did, but it was really hard because I'm like, I am a teacher. Like, this is me. This is what I do. It's my job, and it's why I have a house and a car. And what am I going to do if I'm not that? And I was like, just had to like stop questioning it, stop thinking about it, and stop trying to figure it out, and just not do teaching anymore and just go some other direction. And all sorts of magical, wonderful things happened. And I think people think that that's like a me story, or like I'm special or something, like, oh, well, that happened to you, but that wouldn't happen to me. But I'm like, no, I think it happens to anyone who trusts the pull of their heart and their soul and follows it, you know, that things just happen to work out for you in like perfect time in a perfect way. And do you think that's true, or do you think I'm reckless and advising people to recklessness?
I think that's true. And I think that people need to hear it. I think it's absolutely true. And one reason I say that is because I've learned it in my own crazy gypsy wandering life around the world over and over and over. There is a benevolent design to existence. There has to be, because I'm convinced that the human being was modeled after the cosmos, and that the cosmos is a single entity, a sentient living being, just on a whole different wavelength than a human being or an atom or a planet or a cat. And I have to think that the human body was designed by a cosmic intelligence that wanted it to work right rather than fall apart.
Yeah.
Like, why would life come in to go out?
It's conspiring
that's right.
Help you.
And so in the ideal state, it behooves a single cell in your ankle to be working optimally to free up some cell in your neck or your nervous system, because they're all interrelated. And so are you and I. You know, we're, each of us are cells of a single human entity. And we're also cells of a planetary, galactic, and cosmic being, where it has to be the same principle, that energy wishes to travel in the most elegant way and expend the least amount of itself in order to assist the workings of all its interrelated parts. It just has to be that way. So when a human being unplugs from the I am a teacher world, I am a teacher, I eat teacher lunch, I have a teacher car, I make love in a teacher way, I sleep in a teacher, I am a Republican, I have a Republican wife, I have a Republican hamburger, I drive a Republican. You know, when people jump at us, there is no I am a this. There never needed to be. In earlier centuries, they were a lot smarter than to even think that there was. They were so much more awake in a lot of centuries before we got here, in some ways. In other ways, we're more awake. But one of the ways we are not more awake is that we get locked into this limited John Smith, Mary Brown version of existence. And it's a story. It's nothing more than a story, but stories have the most power of all.
Yeah.
Stories have the power. It's just that most of the stories that drive most of the people are unconscious. They don't think that they're carrying a story. They just think that's the way it is. They just think whatever they think that that's the way it is. They don't think this is a story I'm telling myself, right? But I started to gain consciousness of that at 9 years old in that little secret tunnel, right, on 105 Warwick Avenue in Stratford, Connecticut, the year Kennedy got hit. I'm starting to think they're wearing masks. They're in a disguise. They're not being who they are. And then every 10 years or so, Destiny would send me some reminder, like this substitute high school teacher that came into my English class for about a week when I was like a sophomore in high school. And he called me aside when the rest of the class left. And he said, Mark, you are really alive and rich and fertile with your imagination. And I said, yeah, but so are a lot of other people. He said, yeah, but they lose it. They forget it. They don't hang on to it. I just hope that you do. And so it was like, he was like a reminder of my own vow, right?
That's so awesome. And it's funny because I had a substitute teacher too who was like, the coolest. Her name was Amber. She made us call her Amber instead of Miss whatever. And she had like bangles and like purple hair and like, you know, super hippie 60s energy. And she would just come in and be like, hey, everybody, like, yeah, I love you guys. What are you doing? And just have us like tell her about our lives. And it was always the best day when she was our substitute. She was just such a beautiful force. So that's the other thing that I keep thinking of is like her coming into my life or him coming into your life or us meeting here and all the people who are listening to this, like just being authentically yourself and doing what you love. Like it ripples out in ways you'll never ever know or be able to even imagine. And like you were describing that elegant movement of energy, like I'm just kind of seeing that as like, well, we won't even necessarily get to see the huge pattern that this all makes just because we are doing what we love and what we want to do. And what a beautiful thing.
Right. That's right. And when a person steps out of the limited existence with its consecutive boxed in layers of stories, and they realize that there's another story. This is what I've devoted my life's work to, is bringing new stories in. Because the year that I formed my astrology practice in 1987, I watched Bill Moyers interview Joseph Campbell for his last interview before he died,
Wow.
the Power of Myth. And Campbell put out a call and he said, our world is dying for lack of a good story. The old stories are bankrupt. They're killing everything. We need a new creation myth. We need a new story. And I thought, all right, then I'll be soul level astrology. I'll tell stories of the soul, because if you go deep down that far in, you always end up with a story of love. You always end up with a story of hope, with a story of regeneration. Because even if the worst physical outcome was occurring, like right now, the nuclear bombs are dropping and like you and I have like 15 minutes and then the earth is gone. Even if that was the case, I would rather meet the next 15 minutes with love and with deep acceptance and then cursing it. And so if the worst possible circumstance that could ever happen still isn't strong enough to strip you out of your love and your presence in your soul, then what else could be?
That's a beautiful question. It's a beautiful realization. It's a beautiful place to stand. I do want to ask you about Atlantis, because you mentioned your teacher had a dream of Atlantis, and I was wondering what you thought about that, or if you can share anything about the dream or his understandings of it, or your own understandings of it. And then, yeah, I'll stop there. I'll wait for the rest.
It was a wild dream because Lonsdale it was in the 1970s. He was in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, not very far from where I'm sitting right now. I'm on top of Putney Mountain, Vermont. I'm in southern Vermont. And in those White Mountains in the 1970s, William Lonsdale had this dream that was much more than a dream, where he found himself back in the throne room of Atlantis, and he had to read the souls of two different women. And the way that he did it was his left hand precipitated this little disc, and he held the disc up to one woman, and these 12 colors, etheric colors, on the disc streamed around and then stopped in a pattern. And her soul went through the pattern up his left arm into his heart and head, and then he cleared the disc and he held it up to the other woman, and the same thing happened. The colors swirled and stopped, and he read her, and he snapped out of the dream, and he realized it was a dream of Atlantis from his past life. And all of a sudden, the full memory of how the astrology of that time was used just rushed into him and gave him this whole different astrology that uses the same birth chart, but not in the same orders and things. And then he started channeling thousands of pages of information about the planets and the signs and the degrees.
Wow.
Wild, deep, intense information. And he's still doing that. And he held on to this star genesis, as he came to call it, he didn't let anyone know he was using this whole different system when he did all of his readings. But then in that class that he began to teach, right when I had moved a mile away from his house up in Bonnie Doon, California, outside Santa Cruz in 1991, he and his wife decided to reveal this system to the world for the first time. And it was us. We were the midwives. And so we sat there one night a week for 9 months and got this download that I tape recorded and transcribed, and turned some of that into my first book, 2012 Crossing the Bridge to the Future. And we sat there by the wood stove, and this tall, giant bearded guy, like a prophet, he's like 6'4" or something. And he would spin these tales of history and reincarnation in Egypt and Atlantis and time and space. And what he taught us about Atlantis was that a small group of elite priest scientists got out of control and forgot that they were serving the higher powers. And they got confused, and they began to think that they were the higher powers. And that set in motion the primary collective karma of our species, which is the corrupt elite few lording it over the many. We still haven't turned that one around yet. We're still dealing with Atlantean karma, but when karma exacerbates, it gets ready to break. It's not hidden anymore. It's coming out. Good. The whole thing of 1%, it's scaring the shit out of repressive forces of our time. So they're censoring and locking down and making people afraid. And so that's Atlantean karma reincarnated again, where the masses of people, which is what the Aquarian Age is all about, the masses of the people have to wake up and realize that they have so much more power than any of the elite few, and they have to use that wisely rather than the way it's getting abused now in the whole neo-patriarchy years.
Wow, I love that. It makes a lot of sense. And so when these elite assholes, I feel bad for them sometimes when I hear stuff like that, because I'm like, oh, you're just really confused. I'm always like, why are you even doing any of this? It's never going to work out well for you. It's not going to go well. So I don't understand your motivations, but I guess I'm smarter than you. And I hope that you change your mind soon. But if there's that going on, but then you also mentioned, and I agree that there's these dark entities too, especially that can attach to people or kind of occupy the space people left and, abandoned in themselves and otherwise. And what do you think is going on with them? What do you think that is, and why are they doing that?
Those are the hobgoblins of the human ego mind. And so those are the shadow, vacuous holes in our network that we haven't sufficiently inhabited, perhaps for many lifetimes, and in our current family tree, maybe our forebears also didn't inhabit, and our peers today all around us maybe are also not inhabiting. And so wherever you fail to inhabit your own full magical, sexual, karmic, spiritual nature, you're in that network, you're leaving these little web holes, these little wormholes, right? And so the karmic gremlins sneak in, and they take the form of unconscious monologues to convince you there's something wrong with yourself. And this is what we studied in that mystery school under the redwoods as the galactic virus, which turned virulent in the Industrial Revolution. The galactic virus is to the soul what cancer is to the body. It eats away at the human being's psyche. It makes people think there's something wrong with themselves. And that's the only way you can subjugate and and delude a whole species is if they're carrying a thought form that there's something matter with me, which breaks down to I haven't yet fully arrived. And so you get millions of people walking around the world inwardly knowing that there is so much more that they incarnated for, that they're nowhere near getting to, but they don't want to let themselves believe that, because that's scarier than thinking that it's true, because then they're going to have to get there. And so it's a subjugated population. It's a kind of spiritual Orwellism. It's the sense that people live their lives as if it's like a virtual reality. Well, if I was really alive, this would be my life. But everybody knows we can't have that, right? That's like the ego mind. So those parasitic thought forms you can look at that through the spiritual lens, the mystical lens, the entity lens, but it's also the same as your mind tripping. You're just mind tripping yourself. People have been hoodwinked into thinking there's something wrong with them. I'm not saying that you'll never do anything wrong. I'm not. Of course, you'll do certain wrong things. You're a human being. You're always going to be imperfect. But deep down in your core, on a foundational level, there ain't nothing wrong with you, honey. Even if you're a murderer, deep down in the core, there's a soul force in human beings that is so sick to death of being suppressed, so that people are hoodwinked into going into these jobs and lives and marriages that have nothing to do with who they are and everything to do with who they appease. And that's what we busted out of in the 60s, but a lot of the world crept back in, right? I never went in. I just busted out. I've been busting out ever since, you know.
And jailbreaking everyone else.
That absolutely.
Which is awesome. I know. Excuse me. I have who was my dear friend who actually ended up murdering someone too, and I can't help it that I still love that person and see the good in them, and people think I'm naive and stupid, and I'm like, no, I just remember that there is that, it's still there. I'm not saying I'm gonna put my life in that person's hands. I'm just saying I understand that they're still a soul at some level, and that there's something beautiful in that, and and in that way I also have forgiveness, and that's something that I also have discovered the power of, just within myself. I don't even necessarily need to go up to someone and tell them hey, I'm sorry, or I forgive you, although that's cool too. But even just practicing this internal ability to forgive people, even for things that you thought you couldn't, is very freeing too. It's just another way to unbox yourself, is to let that forgiveness in and out, and just let go, and just remember you also fucked up at some point, royally.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the treasure of karma, which karma doesn't usually get seen as a treasure. Karma has a bad rap and gets a lot of negative press. But actually karma is the greatest gift of all, because all karma is an invitation for you to show up in the places where you've least ever been able to in any lifetime. That's all karma is. Yeah. And so your karma is the most loyal lover in the universe that you could ever find, because it's the one force that will never, ever give up on you. Your karma won't say, Mark Borax, you didn't get that lesson in 15th century Romania. You didn't get it in 19th century Chicago. And you're still not getting it now. I'm done with you. Karma doesn't act that way. Karma says you didn't get it in that life or that life or that life or that life. And guess what? I'm giving you one more chance to get it by putting a rerun in of an old unconscious pattern. That gives you your only chance to wake up. Otherwise, you wake up in the top part of your head, but you don't wake up down in the guts and the core where the karma is, in your shadow, because you're too busy repressing and projecting your shadow, which is the delusion, which is the particular psychotic variant of the United States, disowned shadow, projected shadow, right? But when you own your shadow, then when karma comes back again, it's, I I never fully got the freedom in the bondage here. But when you wake up in the middle of the same situation that you used to be half asleep in, your karma goes away.
Yeah.
And now it turns to grace. And the karma is hitting strong now, which means we have our best opportunity to wake up and turn around the Atlantean karma and fulfill the Aquarian prophecy of the masses realizing they have much more power, and we need to use it for love. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it doesn't matter if it is or it isn't. I'm acting as if it is, and that's the only thing I can do.
Yeah. And that's the best way to make sure that it does, I think.
If there's one way, that'd be it.
Yeah.
I don't want to fall down on the job, and it might not happen, but it ain't going to be because I was off the job.
Right. I love that description of karma. And it's like you said, it's this, friend you have. And it reminds me too of the cave, you go into the cave and there's where you fight your demons and, or you deal with your karma. And then when you're done with that, like you said, you have this grace, you have this tool, you have this, like the magic potion, or you have like the sword that you forged in the dragon's breath or whatever. And now you come out of the cave and now you have that, you can help anybody with that. That's like the tool that everyone needed. And now you have it. And every time you overcome your karma, or however you want to describe that, you're doing that, right? You're bringing that back for everybody.
Absolutely.
A little piece at a time.
What?
A little piece at a time.
That's right. Or sometimes a lot at a time. But you remind me of Joseph Campbell, who was another Sagittarian, because he used to break down all the world's mythologies the way that you just did, where it always starts out that there's this individual who has to separate out from their tribe, their identity, their known safety, and in order to enter a journey into the underworld to face a hideous monster who's guarding a treasure, and the treasure is self-knowledge, and the monster is your shadow, everything that you're not awakened to, and you're projecting and denying, and all the world's myths break down to the same story when you look at it as a story of the soul. So the worst things that are happening on our planet at this time is the monster of disowned consciousness, disowned identity. We have forgotten who we are all over the world. The only remedy is to remember who you are. Remember that you were made of love, that you came from the stars. And I mean literally, not just figuratively, because the iron in your blood cells came from white dwarf stars that exploded on the other side of the galaxy. That's why we have iron in Earth. And the nitrogen that forms our atmosphere was dropped off here by a comet, which is a dirty snowball from the deepest part of the universe. They call it the Oort cloud. A comet came way out of deep space and dropped off nitrogen and gave us an atmosphere. So even in your body, you're actually literally made of stars. And when you think that way, oh, you mean deep space isn't just way on the other side of the galaxy. I'm somebody else's deep space. The cosmos is in me. You don't have to go out of here to get a cosmos or an astrology that excarnates us, that relieves us of the pressures of the physical plane. The pressures of the physical plane is what we need to show up here as the full magical beings that we are. Yes, you're a teacher, but you could never only be a teacher. Of course you're a teacher. You were once a teacher, you're always going to be a teacher, and you're so much more than a teacher. I'm a musician, songwriter, astrologer, poet, teacher, headmaster of a college, the College of Visionaries and Wizards. I'm a this and that and this and that. I'm all of that and none of it. None of it is real in the sense of being literal and permanent, but all of it, it's like none of it is real, but all of it is teaching me something. That's like a mantra. None of this is real. Nothing that's happening now on Earth is permanent, but all of it is relevant. All of it is meaningful. It's Shakespearean. The birth chart is Shakespearean. There's layer after layer after layer after layer, because how could a human being be any less multidimensional than Hamlet or King Lear? I mean, it's just phenomenal. And when you look at a person and you see you came here to incarnate your creative force and be the love you are, and that's a job you got to figure out all over again every day, because there's always some new way to have to be the love you are. And karma is one of your best loyal assistants to help you get there, because it invites you to show up in the places you've had the least amount of ability to show up in life after life. And maybe your mother and grandmother did too, because souls incarnate into family trees that tend to have similar issues to its own past lives.
I feel that a lot, like where I or all of us are either adding to the karma of our ancestors, or we're like finally helping to like untangle it and let it out and let it free, and like, and you know, that idea of like, oh, I'm gonna break the chain, and like that's actually happening in your actions in your real life, but it's happening on like an energetic level too, where you're like, okay, we're done with this now. Let that go.
Absolutely. Yeah, you are walking your ancestors home. You're doing something with your ancestors and your past lives now while you're drinking your beverage and talking to your listeners. You're living your future lives now. You're dead and gone, and your soul is out of here and back again in some other life, even right now. Because if we can have past lives, and I know that we do, then we ourselves are the future lives of those people. So we have future selves, because you're the future self of your past life.
True.
And you can open the time stream when you're not as dominated by Western clock time, linear chronological time that Jean Gebser says it took as many years to create the modern Western version of time as it did to create the pyramids. It took centuries before people conceived that time works this way, like regimented, military, mechanical. A second goes like this, and there are 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes. And that version of time is not totally false. It's good for computers and synchronizations and electron microscopy and surgical things. But it's what is the lie, what is the fiction, is that that's the only way that time moves. That's just one way that time moves. That's just one time stream. And so when you unbind that, you can go back in time. This happens to me many times, where in my work with my clients or with myself or my wife and people like that, their past self comes up into the room because there's this invitation that something it got stuck in, which was the origin of this stuck part of you, is ready to give way, and they're just kind of back again, wanting to establish dialogue, like telepathic dialogue, that there's a new way through this current situation, and I'm going to give you a hand, like your past self is saying, come on, we could do this. Go team, go.
That's so cool. I feel like I've had similar experiences, and I feel like even if we just want to sit and do like a simple practice where you just imagine, going back to yourself as like, the time that you like fell down and scraped your knee and no one was there to help you and it was scary or something, and go back to yourself and just imagine going up to yourself and just hugging yourself and saying like, it's gonna be okay, like I love you, I got your back, like I'm here. And things like that. I think you're literally sending that back to yourself, and then you back then is like, I feel a little bit better all of a sudden, like that's part of what guardian angels are, is like just you're able to send your consciousness wherever you want to.
Absolutely.
And anyone can do it.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just say anyone can do it.
Yeah, your consciousness is unlimited, and when you send yourself back to that earlier version of yourself that might have been having a hard time, you can like say to them, look, I know you're having a hard time here, but you've actually made it through because I'm the proof.
True.
And that's what your future selves are saying to you now. The whole world's future self, humanity's future selves are flocking to Earth and saying, honey, you've got this, you got it, you've made it. And that doesn't mean that the assurance of the survival of civilization or the thriving of the planet are a sure thing, are guaranteed, because I don't think they are. I think it's still a bit up for grabs. But what it does mean is that you're not limited by the apparent limitations of the physical plane, which result from stories of limitation that people tell themselves without knowing they're telling themselves, because they got raised by people who did the same thing, who got raised by people who did the same thing, right?
Right. Yes.
But then once in a while, somebody breaks out, right? Like we did in the 60s, we had a mass breakout, which I've never recovered from.
Good.
I'm still breaking out.
Yeah. Keep it going. Keep us leaking out of these, or maybe
all right, man.
Flooding out.
I'm on it.
Speaking of that, unknown future, and that it could go any way, what is your highest vision of the best version of like what could happen from here, and how we save ourselves and the world?
My higher version of what can happen from here and how we can save ourselves in the world, it begins with a realness, injecting into people's souls all over the world, of every gender and color and race and religion, people in Russia and Kentucky and China and Africa and Canada and South America and everywhere. It's a realness, which is our proximity to losing it all and really blowing it big time, can, like the specter of possible oncoming death, shake people awake, like happens with people when they get into a bad car accident or find out they have cancer, or their wife has cancer or something. When the trauma and the crisis hits is the first time modern people get a chance to break out of the prison that they don't know that they're in. Mm-hmm. And so the gift of trauma and crisis, which we're in big time now, all over the world. And I'm not talking about COVID, because I don't think that's a crisis. But what the crisis is, a war on truth, a war on reality, a war on instinct. People massively twisted and confused. And my dream of what can happen from here is that first, a realness injects back in all over the world and all kinds of people underneath the illusion. Just this realness, like, come on here. We can do better than this. The great avatars from history told us that then. They all told us the same thing. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That's it. There's no better truth. There's no higher truth. Love. Treat yourself and others with love. Treat other people the way you'd like to be treated. We don't need any other wisdom. We just need to use the ones we've already had for so long. It was Christ and Buddha and Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Mother Teresa and John Lennon. They were all saying the same thing. All you need is love, but it's got to go deep and take you far. John, you got it, brother. You got it. But all you need is love, but it's got to go deep and take you really far in and far out, to live your love, to be your truth, to not wait for some other lifetime, to just get it. This is a fucking paradise. This is a miracle. This is a blue-green garden planet just spinning through space like a dancing woman. What a miracle that you and I have chosen to incarnate at this changing of the guard, and that the realness would just come in, so that all the political nightmare and the 1% and the Bill Gateses and the Jeff Bezoses and the rich rapers and destroyers, that realness would start to eat away at the Atlantean karma of the elite corrupt few lording over the many. And that Aquarian awakening would come in and say, wait a minute, what is this all about? Who was living my life? Where was I? I'm back. I'm here again. Oh God, man. And the rain is falling. And look at that mist. it's rainy and misty and I'm alive.
I love this vision. I'm like visualizing that the whole time that you're describing that, and so is everyone else. And so we're making it happen even as we speak.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful. It is. I really feel like truth and love, like you said, if they go deep, if you're actually like feeling them as the core of what you actually are like unstoppable. Like that is the force that's unstoppable. You can like transmit that to people through your eyes, you know, and I think that's part of why they're like, stay 6 feet apart and cover your face up, and, you know, like don't transmit the truth that you have inside of you by any means, but they don't realize that that's not going to stop us either. So
yep.
we're
that's
good.
Right. Yeah. And I think the main principle is the pendulum, where as in the 1960s and 70s, when the war in Southeast Asia exacerbated so bad, and especially before mainstream media was censored to become an organ of the state war machine like it is today, we saw on the 6 o'clock news with Uncle Walter Cronkite, the boys in the body bags being flown home from Vietnam to the United States. Every night you'd see the body bags, you'd see the boxes and the flags. And when the pendulum swung that far towards the corrupt wrongness, it then swung way back towards the 1960s revolution. And since the 1960s revolution, the pendulum got co-opted back again towards the crackdown, fascism, numb years. But now what's happening is getting getting worse than it was in the 60s, the worst of the 60s. We are already worse than the worst of the 60s with the repression and the fascism and the lockdown and the lies. And so the pendulum can't swing all the way this far in that direction without, there's only one place to go. It's just going to come back again. And it's starting in these little pops of awakening cellular consciousness, like the beginning early puddles of a rainfall, that the puddles are going to spread until they all connect with each other.
Yeah. We're going to make an ocean. Oh, I love it. And we're seeing that. You're right. There's all these huge protests that are going on around the world that are, of course, suppressed and we're not allowed to see. And there's people that are resisting in various ways and choosing other routes and waking up and notifying each other. And, you know, there's a lot of little signals we see about it, but we're not allowed to see it fully, at least not on our mass media, because they don't want us to, you know. But those are the other things that we have to like feel that happening, because we might not be able to see it and like know it in that way, but we know it, you know.
That's right. That's right. Which is why I named our College of Visionaries and Wizards has an annual membership program that I named Tribal Drumbeat. Huh. Because just what you said, in the drums, in the tribal drumbeat of the soul, there's a lot of news that the New York Times doesn't want to get spread around. Stories of regeneration and kindness and miracle and wonder and evolution and truth and reality and love. And all of those things are the most dangerous infidels to the forces controlling the government, which is now run by big pharmacy. Yeah. We don't have government anymore. We have big pharmacy government, the drug cartels.
Big corporations.
Taken over.
Yeah.
and that awakening is the scariest shit to them. So the more that you awaken, the more that you're going to join these awakening pods, these poppings of consciousness all over the world. That's how it happened in the 60s. We're probably like, the parallel right now, I bet we're somewhere around 1966. It's like 68 was the really big year of the 60s. We're like right around 66, 65. 65, 66. Something's coming and it can't be stopped, but it's impossible to know what form it's going to take. And you're going to have to surf the tsunami.
I love that too. Surf the tsunami. I'm down for surfing lessons. Well, will you tell us about your college that you have and what people can join or how and what they might expect to find there?
Absolutely. It's called the College of Visionaries and Wizards, CVW. I and my wife founded it in 2008. and it's an international school where I teach a 3-year chart study program by Zoom for 2 hours once a week to a group of people, 20 people at a time. I teach them how to read charts the magical way that I do.
Awesome.
And they form deep bonds. And actually our next series, there's 6 semesters in 3 years. And the current series is winding up semester 4. And so not next autumn, but the autumn after that, we're starting a new 3-year round, and we do an intro semester the semester before that. So if anybody's excited about this, just check out markborax.com, and you'll find links to the College of Visionaries and Wizards. We also teach other classes, and there's other teachers and supporting groups in conjunction with it. And so, yeah, anybody who's interested in the school, just look up markborax.com and you can find out about that. You'll get my email if you want to email me, ask me questions. I still do private readings by telephone and sometimes by Zoom. You can find out about that on my website. Selling a couple of my old books, and I'm still hard at work writing my new book, The Ruby Heart of the Dragon, Sun Signs for Our Times. And you can also sign up for my free monthly Cosmic Weather Report newsletter, which will keep you informed as to what's going on with my book. And once you sign up, if you sign up within the next 24 hours, especially for my newsletter, you will get on the list of people who qualify for a free chapter on your sun sign when the book gets closer to publication.
I love that. And I'm showing them your cover right now, which is so cool because it has dragons on it because it's the Ruby Heart of the Dragon. And what made you title it that? What is the Ruby Heart of the Dragon?
The Ruby Heart of the Dragon is your sun sign in your birth chart in relation to the dragon's tail, which is the south node of the moon, and the dragon's head, which is the north node of the moon. The dragon's tail indicates your leftover issues from past lives. And the dragon's head indicates your optimal destiny in this life if you followed the path of least resistance and you got to your optimal future. And your sun sign I'm looking at as sandwiched in between the dragon's tail and dragon's head. It's the deep love in you. It's Rumi's Ruby. He has these poems where he says, you spend all your time inside your walls with your pictures and your musical instruments. Tear down your walls. Underneath your house is a ruby. He's saying, tear down the ego, tear down your structures, tear down the I am a teacher, tear down the I am a Republican, tear down the, oh, it's all bad and getting worse and there's something wrong with me. And underneath that house of affairs and ego, you'll find the love, you'll find the soul, you'll find the ruby gem. So that I'm looking at as your sun sign, and I'm totally revamping. I'm having the most fun of my life because I'm finally putting together all my astrology expertise with my writing expertise. And I've never done that before. So I'm just like tearing down the signs and just completely building them up again. And I've been doing the book for 2.5 years, and I'm closing in on the finale. So it's very exciting for me right now. In fact, your viewers are the first people to see the book cover illustration outside of 4 or 5 people on my book launch team.
Wow, so, that's very exciting.
That's my gift to you tonight, is showing you the dragon.
Thank you. And explaining what the dragon means, which makes me feel like I know who suggested you now that I'm thinking about it, actually. But anyways, because someone was just explaining to me how the north node and the south node that are the tail and the head? Yeah.
The north node is the head.
Okay.
And the south node is the tail.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Now I want to go back and look at my chart again.
Yeah. We met on Facebook where a month or 2 ago, I was looking through my Facebook personal messages and I found yours. And I think you had written it like a year before or 6 months before. And I rarely get I don't get a whole lot of PM messages on Facebook. But I found yours and I wrote you back. I said, if you're still interested in this, let's talk. and you wrote me and said, I don't remember you or anything.
I don't remember where you came from.
And I said, here's my name and my website, and and it went from there.
That's so funny. Well, it's funny too, because it makes a lot more sense that I would interview you now than way back then, because everything that we've talked about is like perfectly timed, obviously, as it always is. So that's so funny and perfect. That's just how life goes. You have this Jim Morrison quote that I'm going to read, and this is in your email. Every time I got an email from you, I'm reading this quote, and it says, "The most important kind of freedom is to be what you really are. You trade in your reality for a role. You give up your ability to feel, and in exchange, put on a mask." I love that. I've never heard that quote before, and it's so important, especially for now. And if you just want to comment on that at all or share anything about it that you want to, I would love that.
Yeah, another Sagittarius.
Of course I like him.
Yeah. I too was very taken by that Morrison quote. I know a good deal about Morrison and his writing, which I turned on to. He was the first person to use the word shaman in my 13-year-old reading of his book of poetry, The Lords and the New Creatures. But I hadn't known that he had said that till like a year or two ago. I got that quote. A friend of mine showed me that quote, and I put it into my email closing signature. And that goes back to the 9-year-old revelation I had in the secret passageway, which is they're not who they are. I'm never going to forget. I don't know what made them forget, but I won't. And I kept that vow. Sometimes childhood vows are the deepest and the most binding. And I think most people make them, but many people forget that they make them. They go unconscious, or they make them unconsciously in the first place. And I forgot that I made my childhood vow. I made it when I was 9. I'm never going to be like them. I'm never going to forget the magic. That's what I said over and over in that little dark passageway. And I was age 9, 1963. And probably starting in the 1970s, maybe sometime, I forgot about it. It slipped into my unconscious or semi-conscious. And then decades went by, and I had a deep therapy session on Vashon Island, Washington, where I lived at the time. I love Vashon too. I lived there. I spent a year there. I spent 3 years on Vashon, but actually, no, this was on Whidbey.
Whidbey is where I grew up.
On Whidbey.
What year was it? That's where I grew up.
Oh my God.
What year was it?
It was 1993.
Wow, it's right when I was breaking. Like, really.
Were you there then?
Yeah.
How old were you then?
I was 12.
Wow.
So I was
Did you go to the doghouse?
Yeah.
Yeah, my band played there. I was in this band called Pulse. We were all drums.
Wow.
Did you know Deborah Koff Chapin?
It sounds kind of familiar, but no, not.
She's the artist. Anyway, I was on Whidbey, and
of course.
What was I just talking about?
Oh God. I was really into it too, and then I.
Yeah. Let's see.
Maybe someone in the chat.
Totally just gone.
It's so weird because I usually remember, and I'm the one to bring people back on track, but I got like lost in that synchronicity.
Can your viewers chat you?
Yeah.
Ask somebody to...
Tell us what we were talking about, guys.
What the hell was I talking about? You guys are going to have to take over because
I'm not sure.
I know you asked me a good question. I was gearing up, but I can't remember where I was going.
It was the Jim Morrison thing, and you were talking about not forgetting Morrison. Your childhood vow. And then
got it.
Okay, you got it. Good.
Thank you. On Whidbey Island, I had a deep therapy session.
Oh yeah.
And in that session, these deep feelings came up of my karma with why won't the world recognize me? This was like a big karma of mine. Why won't the world why am I misunderstood? And I have so much potential that I can't activate, and it's driving me fucking crazy. And I don't know what the therapist questioned. I don't know what led to it, but in my belly, I was back in Stratford in the secret passageway. I was in between rooms in a tunnel, and I could smell it and feel it, and all of a sudden the full, like the psychic emotive force of having decided at age 9 that my parents and other adults are not who they are, and I will never do that. It came like ripping out of me, and I was just weeping. I was crying tears and shaking, because I had not only kept my vow, even though I'd totally forgotten it. This was the first time I'd probably remembered it in 30 or 40 years, or I don't know what. But it wasn't that not only I had kept it, but it was that I kept it so well that I wouldn't even let myself go near financial security, financial certainty, full recognition or fame or fortune or popularity. That was my father's wound. That was my mother's mask. And so my vow had unconsciously deepened its hold on me and kept me in this hippie, LSD, sex maniac, songwriting, astrology life, which was really wild, but it wasn't fully gelling. It wasn't what my soul came here to do. I needed further maturing and buckling down and not running away from abundance, nor running toward it, but just allowing the abundance of the earth to just stream up through me and the freedom of the sky to stream down into me.
I love that. I really needed to hear that because it makes sense to me, which it makes sense that you had that realization on Whidbey Island, where I was also.
Man, you're my island mate.
Yeah.
You're my island buddy.
The island is like the weirdest vortex I've ever been in. It's a crazy place. I don't know.
That's so wild.
It is wild.
Were you in Langley?
Well, I've lived in Langley and Freeland and Clinton and Greenbank and all over the island because we moved.
I lived in Clinton and Langley.
Wow.
Yeah.
You lived there for a whole year. I feel like we probably ran into each other.
Yeah.
I just was 12 and you were, older, and we
at the doghouse or wherever.
That is so funny.
Then I lived on Vashon for 3 years.
I love that. So you've seen the bike in the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. What
and the troll under the bridge in Seattle.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that whole area. I'm very fond of it, obviously, because I grew up there, but I don't live there anymore, and it's weird. But I try not to.
Rockies?
Yeah, I'm over in Colorado in the Rockies now, and which is also another home of mine from when I was very young. I was born in Montana, or in North Dakota actually, and lived in Montana for a few years. So I'm no stranger to the Rockies. So I kind of felt like I came home when I came here, but I also felt like I left home. So it's just very interesting to be in like both places. At once, and I don't know where I was headed with that, but yeah.
I can definitely relate. I don't know anyone who's had a wandering life like mine.
Yeah, I bet you're the most wanderingest person I've ever met besides myself.
In a funny kind of way, that I think the best way to measure it is if you ever ask somebody, do you think you've lived in a lot of homes? I mean, they might say something like 40 or 50 or whatever. I've lived in like 130 homes.
Wow, I thought I was a lot, and I've had 40, so that's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you probably think that's a real lot, like more than everyone.
Yeah, because everyone else is like, oh, I've had like 4, maybe
Totally.
10, and I'm like, I've lived in more houses than years old I am. So actually, this is the year that they became even. So next year, I will finally have been more years old than houses I've lived in, I think.
Congrats. You should have a party.
Yes. I love wandering. I love being a gypsy, but I've also found great pleasure in being stable, too. So I've learned that in my life.
Yeah.
Well, was the counselor or the therapist named Chris by chance?
It was a she, and I can't remember her name.
Not the first.
But I did have a friend named Chris on Whidbey. Chris Holder. Do you know the Holders?
Yes, that's exactly who I was just thinking of.
Chris Holder?
That's who I meant, yeah.
He was in a band. I was in a band with him.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. I don't actually even know Chris Holder. I just know how amazing Chris Holder is because my sister knows how amazing Chris Holder is. So
yeah,
that's amazing.
Is your sister older?
She's 1.5 years older than me, yeah.
What's her name?
Her name is Kendra.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is so funny. I remember that little commune where they all lived.
Yes.
Did you know that little circle? They called it circle something. There was a little circle of houses.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, it had some name. I forget what it was. Something circle.
I bet we could start listing a bunch of names and we would both know them, but that's pretty
Totally.
small world.
All your listeners will say, what the fuck? They're just going into their own little universe.
What are they talking about now? Well, speaking of that, I do want to bring things to a close. So what I always want to ask people, what are your, first of all, we'll say again, your site is markborax.com, and people can go sign up for the newsletter and therefore be eligible to get their chapter of the sun sign that corresponds to them of the Ruby Heart of the Dragon book when it comes out, which is very exciting. And then what else, if there's any other things you have coming up or like offers or whatever that you want people to know about? And I always also like to ask people what their final words of wisdom are for people.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. markborax.com, MARKBORAX. You could find out everything you want to know about me. And you get on my newsletter. And because I can't think of anything more coming up other than we are going to launch a 3-year chart study program in around a year or so. And and by getting on the newsletter, you'll always find out about my classes and my books and special offerings and things like that.
Awesome.
And what words of wisdom?
Yeah, your final thoughts for people.
This is a miraculous time to be alive, because there's so much that hasn't happened yet for the human species, and just feel that potential wanting to act through you as an instrument.
Beautifully said. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom according to the soul astrologer, Mark Borax. Mark, thank you so much for being with us tonight. It has been a pleasure, and the audience loves you a lot.
My pleasure, Lindsay. It's been really fun. I mean, we hit it right off the bat. So.
And we've been in the same place at the same time and didn't know it.
That's so cool.
That's awesome.
And you guys, all you listeners, were right there at the moment when we discovered it.
It's true.
Pretty exciting.
Well, guidance and training are essential. We start as newborns in any venture. We can barely see. We can barely control any of our movements. We are most likely to react in an instinctual manner rather than respond in thoughtfulness, because we don't even know where we are or who we are or what we are. Multitudes of lessons unfurl the details of those answers to who, what, and where we really are. We take lots of time and many ingredients to develop a well-balanced approach to all these stimuli on training ground earth. And when we have some hands up from those who came before and some pointers from those who have mastered the arts we are most drawn to, we are truly blessed. At the same time, never forget the potential for what has been hidden for eternities to be revealed in a single moment. And until you master the art of both striving and receiving, learning and being, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Baby, it's the rap machine. Yeah, check it. Gray bearded pirate, my motherfucker unknown. Yeah, come on. In the place with my fist up, meaning I resist the bullshit that they feed us and lead us. This is just a part of the process, man. Just watch this, cause this shit's about to get crazy like a mosh pit. We lost it, toss it, let's start it again. Cause now with technology, with smarter men and women, this is the beginning, not the end. If this is the message of hope that I send, look on your TV, it's a culture of death. They'll keep on lying to the very last breath. We keep on striving and spreading the truth. It's hard to survive in this world for the youth. The door is closed, the old world is dead. Let's have an age of understanding instead. I'll include you and you include me. Let's see what we can build with some positivity. Let's go, you're moving too slow. Let me see your hands if you know what I know. Come on.
Rap like mummy, ain't no dummy in my rhyming. Started flowing freestyle and now they rhyming loud silence. On with the violence, bodies piling with the gray-bearded pirate. On your TV in 4K 3D virtual reality. Casualty of urban warfare. I know but I'm not scared, just prepared and aware. shining my light through the tunnel of hope into the rope, but I'ma give it one more pull till the family is full. Take the bull by the horns and lead it to the slaughter. That would be harder and you would be softer. Sometimes I'm a monster and you forever imposter, which is champagne and lobster. This royalty, the way it was supposed to be. Hopefully the new door opens and the old one closes with way more focus and growth to mold us, and the truth that they should have told us.
To them screens, it's a plot to drop the IQ. Fighting amongst each other over rulers that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that a flicker rate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The pompous see this mockery and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet. Everyone got a gift, everyone got a light. They want you to forget that ish, cause they can't dim the bright. The positive vibration takes you past the sign shackles, from the sewers and the alleys in the moving castles. Who these assholes really serving with an exposed Achilles surgeon around the corner lurking to prove ascension trumps perversion? Learn them to catch fish and unplug the signal. Show them the simpletons now build the fucking temples.